In yet another attempt to persuade the American people that he's on the right track, the president took to the airwaves tonight, but Senator Sen Gregg, who withdrew his nomination for Commerce Secretary, maintains that President Obama's budget will bankrupt this country. And he joins us now. Senator, good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Sean, thank you for having me on.
All right, well, you heard the president tonight. I don't think he had a lot of tough questions, as we've been discussing earlier. There was no real follow-ups, no real analysis, no tough questions. But do you really believe his budget will bankrupt this country?
Well, it certainly puts us on that path because, as a very practical matter, it doubles the debt in 5 years, triples it in 10 years, expands the rate of growth of the government exponentially, takes the size of the government up to 23% of gross national product, which we haven't been at since World War II, and basically puts us in a position where we're going to have so much debt on the books and it's going to be coming at us so fast that it'll be very hard for us to pay for it. I suppose we can always inflate our way out of it, but as a very practical matter, we're going to, under either scenario, pass on to our kids a country they can't afford and something that is less than what we were given by our parents.
Well, Republican senators, including yourself, Senator, have had some pretty strong words. You said that these debt levels are unsustainable, that it's put us on a fiscal path resembling a banana republic. Senator Mitch McConnell said earlier the Obama budget makes us worse than Cuba, our higher deficit than Cuba. Senator Charles Grassley said this budget moves America towards socialism. Does that mean that you're shaking your head? You agree with all those statements?
Well, basically, they point out the real concerns. This is you know, historically budgets have sort of been sort of poo-pahd, but this isn't. This is a very serious budget, and the purpose of this budget is to dramatically expand the size of government, and in the process, it dramatically expands the burden of government and the debt burden specifically. And then it significantly raises taxes, but it doesn't use those taxes to reduce the deficit or reduce the debt. It actually uses those taxes to expand the size of the government again. And, you know, when Bill Clinton came into office, you know, he's a Democrat, as is President Obama, and their purpose was to raise taxes. Well, Bill Clinton used that tax increase to actually reduce the deficit. What President Obama is suggesting, or his budget is proposing, is to use those taxes to basically explode the size of government. And it grows so quickly that it essentially can't be afforded because the amount of debt that's being put on the books is massive.
Yeah.
Try to put it in another perspective. If you take all the debt put on the books between George Washington and George W. Bush, every president we've had between George Washington and George W. Bush, all that debt, President Obama's budget puts more debt than that on the books in the first 5 years.
Senator, you have emerged as one of Barack Obama's staunchest critics, but yet you were on the verge of becoming a part of his administration. How did we go from there to where we are now?
Well, I do support him on a number of issues, too. I think his initiatives in the area of financial stability have been good, and I think that his initiative here in Iraq and in Afghanistan have been the right approach. But on the issue of the budget, I can't support him, and that's one of the reasons why I chose not to serve in his administration, because obviously a member of the cabinet should be 100% with the president 100% of the time, and I realized I couldn't do that. It was my mistake. I acknowledge that, but when you look at this budget, it's a lot bigger than me. It's a lot bigger than actually the president. It's about passing on to our kids a government that can be afforded and a nation that can prosper.
Well, one of the things that is frustrating to me, and we're literally witnessing, Senator, one of the biggest power grabs we've ever seen in the history of the country as we watch different proposals just emerge this week. For example, they want the right to curb CEO pay even for companies that are not part of the bailout. They're asking for the power to actually seize firms that are not getting government bailouts here. They're talking about reconciliation as a means of passing their health care reform to cap and trade. This is under deep consideration. In other words, for those that don't understand what that means, they would literally pass this with a simple majority, taking away historical powers of the United States Senate for a huge power grab. Don't you think those...
Reconciliation means you pass a bill in 20 hours and it's not allowed to be amended, and it's an up and down vote with 51 votes. The whole concept of the Senate, of course, the reason we put it into our constitutional form of structure, was to have a place where issues were aired out, where there was debate, discussion, and then amendments, especially on issues of major public policy. Now, reconciliation has been used in the past. I've supported it in the past, but it's always been on issues, on policies which already exist, you know, adjusting tax laws, adjusting tax rates, affecting this program that already exists or that program. But when you're taking the entire health system of the United States, restructuring it, changing it fundamentally, moving it to the left significantly, basically nationalizing it for all intents and purposes, and you do that in a 20-hour period without amendment, without without any opportunity to basically change it on the floor of the Senate, well, you might as well not have a Senate. You might as well just have a House of Representatives. It totally undermines the purposes of the two branches of government.
But one of the things the president also wasn't pressed on today is the actual numbers that we're talking about. If we look at the CBO numbers that get rid of the Obama rosy projections that have been out here, the CBO is projecting that, we're literally adding $1 trillion a year for 10 years, but the president insisted again and again tonight that, in fact, his budget will cut the deficit in half. By 2019, the government will be paying $806 billion annually on interest charges alone. Senator.
Well, your numbers are right. What's happening here is he's claiming he's cutting the deficit in half by doing this. He takes 6 steps backwards. In other words, the budget basically quadruples, and then you cut it in half, and you end up only taking 2 steps forward. So you're still going backwards. I mean, basically, when you take a deficit that's $1.8 trillion or $1.4 trillion, depending on which number you use here, and you cut it to $700 billion or $500 billion, basically, you're not moving forward very fast. You're actually compounding the problem because you haven't moved the deficit down to a level that's affordable.
Yeah.
And as you say, your numbers are correct. It basically averages out at $1 trillion a year. Well, at $1 trillion a year, you're running a deficit which is 4 to 5% of GDP. No industrialized country can sustain that type of a deficit. No banana republic can sustain it either. And it basically leads to so much debt so fast that basically you have to end up with inflating to get out of the situation, or you basically put the country in a very difficult situation relative to tax burden.
All right, Senator, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.